Hello! So it's been a while since we looked at LittleNavMap in a video, and LittleNavMap has changed quite a lot. So I'm looking here at the latest beta, or beta depending on which part of the world you're from, which is version 2.8.1, and we're going to start from scratch as if we've never used it before. So if you have just installed LittleNavMap, you won't even see any of this data on the map. If we can simulate that quite easily just by doing that. I've got the simulator running, which is why you can see a yellow aeroplane down here. But, when you start out of the box, you won't see anything on the map. So on the first install, it will actually prompt you for this. But if you have skipped past that, all you need to do is go into the scenery library menu and load the scenery library. And that will pop open this dialog. It knows automatically where Flight Simulator is. And you can just click on load. And you can see the data here of what it loaded the last time I did it. So it loads basically all of the airports, the VORs, the ILSs, NDBs, markers, everything you might want, all the airspaces as well, and puts them on the map basically. So if we close out of that, it takes a few minutes to do it, and it's worth pointing out actually, if you go and add some new custom scenery to Flight Simulator, as long as that scenery isn't encrypted in any way, then if you go and reload your scenery library, then you will be able to see it. So if you've downloaded scenery from flightsim.to, for example, then it will be there on your map if you reload your scenery library. Okay, so once you've loaded your scenery, you will suddenly see a load of information appearing on the map. And I'm going to switch some of these things on. I'll come back to this later with what this all does. Okay. So what you get, so when you zoom in, you can suddenly see the map becomes more populous as you get further zoomed in. I'm using the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, by the way. So you can see I'm sat here at an airport. If I keep zooming in, I'll actually see the outline of the airport. Yeah, and the parking and the parking spot numbers. So you can keep zooming in and zooming out with the mouse, and it does all that nicely for you, and it provides more information the more you zoom in and out. So what is LittleNavMap actually for? Well, while we're flying along in the simulator, that yellow aeroplane will move. Yeah, and it will actually draw a dotted line behind it, so you can track where you've been and where you're going. But beyond that, this is a fantastic planning application. So what we can do, we'll do this for a VFR flight to begin with, so visual flight rules. We're going to right click on an airfield. We're going to, on the context menu that pops up, we're going to say set that airport as our departure airport. And then we're going to say, okay, we'll go to fly via the Compton VOR over here. So we'll right click on that VOR and we'll add that to our flight plan. And then we'll go over to, say, Kidlington. So we'll right click on Kidlington and add that to our flight plan. You can see, by saying add, it's figured out actually that was closer to the middle of this route than it was to sticking it on the end, so it's put it in the middle. So I can press Ctrl Z, which does undo, which you can also get to up here on the toolbar. But instead of doing add to my flight plan, I can append it. So append it puts it on the end of my flight plan. So if I go and right click on Kidlington and append onto my flight plan, it puts it on the end. Okay, so some things to notice straight away. Look, along the lines of the flight plan, it's showing you the distances and the bearings, or headings to fly, I should say. So you can see distance and course along each leg of the flight plan. Beyond that, you can actually see more. If we come in here and look at this data, while we were adding bits to the flight plan, it was building this list up. So we're leaving Wickham, we're flying via Compton, going to Kidlington, and you can see data. You can configure what data is shown by opening this dialog out on the little cog menu on the flight plan, and you can say, okay, for a VFR flight, all I really want to see is leg time and remaining nautical miles. And I can say okay, and it gives you that, the basics to know how far you've got to go. And that's as far as a lot of people ever take LittleNavMap if they're just flying around and having fun. But beyond that, you can get into right-clicking on your aeroplane, and while you're in flight, for example, you might want to do some measuring of things. So you can measure the distance, and then you get out the mouse and you can just draw on the map. So wherever I click the left mouse button down now, we'll actually leave that there, and that line is stuck there on the map. To get rid of that line, I can go and right click on that plus mark and I can remove the measurement. Okay. By the same token, we can right click anywhere on the map and we can add range rings. So if we do that, it asks us what range rings we want. So we might want one at 10 miles, one at 50 miles and one at 100 miles, for example. And then we can say OK, and then we get our range rings. Okay. You can right click on the range rings and you can remove the range rings by the same way. Okay, so you can imagine very quickly that's how you could make a VFR flight plan. Now if you notice, while we were putting these waypoints down, it was busy drawing this plot underneath as well of the ground underneath our flight plan. So you can see there's the top of climb, there's us getting to Compton, there's the top of descent, and there's us landing at Oxford. So how on earth did it figure this out? How did it know that our aeroplane was going to take that long? So if you notice at the top of the screen, it says Cessna C172 Skyhawk. That refers to the aircraft menu and aircraft performance files. Now you can download these from the LittleNavMap website. So if you just Google LittleNavMap performance, you'll find the link to it. So if I open an aircraft performance file, you can see I've got a number of them in my file system. So I've just gone for the Cessna 172 Skyhawk performance file. I've renamed all of these, by the way. So I can open it, and that's all well and good. It says, oh, there's a problem here, because I'm actually in a 152 on the ground in a simulator. Look, user aircraft type 152 is not equal to Skyhawk. But it's good enough for us for the moment. But what we can do, instead of relying on whatever files we can find, we can go in the aircraft menu and we can make a new aircraft performance. Yeah? And once you've made a new one, you can actually come in and edit all the data. So you can edit the performance data of the aeroplane, of its climb rate and climb speed, that kind of thing, descent rate, descent speed, enough for it to be able to figure this out. Also the fuel burn rate during the different phases of flight, so it can calculate if you can carry enough fuel to make the journey you're wanting to. So that's all well and good, but that might be quite difficult to find that data out. So actually LittleNavMap has a trick up its sleeve, because if you think about it, there's this aeroplane. It can see where you are and it can track the data from the simulator about the aeroplane. So what you can actually do is, in the aircraft menu, you can restart aircraft performance collection. It turns out the entire time LittleNavMap is running, it is actually collecting data on the aeroplane that you have selected. So what you can do is restart performance collection, which zeroes everything, go and do a flight in whatever aeroplane you want, and then merge that performance data into whatever profile you have loaded. So it will use the data that it has seen about the aeroplane to figure out how much fuel it burns in climb, in descent and in cruise, how fast it is, and all that kind of thing. So it's a bit better actually than having the textbook data, because then the performance data is actually the way you fly the aeroplane. So you're going to get accurate numbers based on the way you typically operate the aeroplane, rather than a test pilot's logbook, you know, with flying things absolutely by the book. So anyway, so that's aircraft performance, and that is what gives it this data to be able to plot. But beyond that, yeah, this the plot underneath you is really handy, especially if you're going somewhere mountainous like the Alps or the Pyrenees or anywhere like that. Okay, so that's how you can track flights and you can fly along them, and that's all well and good. What about seeing other people? If you click at the top of the screen up here, there's online clients. So I'm going to go and click on it, and you can see a load of little red aeroplanes have just sprung up all over the place, little clusters of them where friends have gone out flying, I guess, together. So this is actually reading some data, and I'll get to what it does in a minute. This is going to update every 5 seconds because that's what I've told it to do, and you can see these people are flying along. and having all their fun. So if we go and click on one of them, or just hover over one, you'll notice when you hover over anything, you get a pop-up dialog telling you about it. Yeah, there's actually 2 planes down there. So it stacks them up if if they're very close together. If we zoom right in, we can see both of them. Look, whoops, they've moved before we could see them. So yeah, if you click on one of the aeroplanes, it shows it in a dialog over here. So that's how you can see online clients. We'll get back to how you configure that in a minute. So before we go any further, you've kind of seen the basics of we can program flights and we can see lots and lots of information around the screen. Let's go and remove all of these dialogues and kind of ruin LittleNavMap and bring it right back down to basics. So get rid of everything and we'll build it up a bit at a time so you get to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to say a new flight plan in the file menu. So I'll say don't save the changes. So we've got nothing in here now. Yep. So we go file, I did new flight plan, and we've got rid of everything. Okay. So in the window menu are all the various pieces of the interface that you just saw that we could play with. If we click on each of these pieces, they will reappear and we can move them around. So if we say I want the flight plan, or we'll do search first, or we'll do them in order. Search, and that pops open the search dialog. So you will notice a lot of these dialogues have tabs in them because there's a lot of functionality hidden inside them. So search can search airports, nav aids, procedures, user points. User points are just where you've put up in the map yourself. Yeah, and you can see you can import them. So I've imported a CSV here of user points. We'll come back to that though. The logbook, so as you fly around you can have it record your flights in the logbook. The online clients, those are the people you saw, the little red aeroplanes, and that will update every 5 seconds. Online centers, if you're connected to VATSIM, for example, that will show you all of the centers that are online. We'll come back to that. And online servers, we don't need to worry about that. Okay, so say we were going to do a search for an airport. We can either go by the ICAO code for the airport, so that would be Stansted, and you can see a yellow circle appeared on the map. If we double click on Stansted, it goes straight to it. We could go for KSFO for San Francisco International, for example. If we double click on that, it goes straight to it. And if we zoom out, we can obviously see the San Francisco Bay. By the same token, you can look for nav aids, so you could put CPT for Compton, which is the VOR in the centre of the UK. You can search for things by name as well, so I could put in a London City and it's found at EGLC, so there's London City Airport. So you can see very quickly you can be searching for all sorts of things, so airports, nav aids, procedures and so on. So we'll come back to looking at IFR procedures in a minute, so SIDS, stars, that kind of thing. Okay, so you can see when we were clicking on things, this popped up to show information. We'll come back to that. So we've seen the search so far. If we go back to that window menu, we can open flight planning, which is just this one part of this. So we got the remarks, so we could write some text in here. If we have written text, it will appear in here. So if we were to go and put a flight plan in, so say we went from London City, so we set it as our destination, as a departure, and we choose a runway. When you choose a runway with options, notice you get the option to choose a runway. So if we just set the airport as departure, it won't ask. If we select a runway, it will ask. So if we say select London, begin as a departure, it noticed it didn't ask. If we right click and say select runway and use London City, it will ask. So that's a departure from the old version of LittleNavMap. It didn't used to have that option at all. So we could say that, and we'll say we're going to leave on, let's do it again. So right click and select runway and use London City as the departure point and say OK. And you can see, and it's put in, because we left on that runway, it's put in a little bit of flight map out to the climb out, basically, away from the runway, on runway 09 there. Notice when you hover over an airport, you don't just get the information on the airport, you also get the ILS. Oops, it's a bit fiddly with the mouse. You get the airport information, you also get the ILS information for the runways, which is really handy. Notice on the airport information you also get the METAR readout for the weather. So a common mistake people make in LittleNavMap is they see this yellow wind arrow with a direction and a speed up here, and they think that's the speed where they're looking. It's not. That is the speed the aeroplane that's connected, the simulator, the aeroplane in the simulator is experiencing. Okay, so yeah, if we go and quickly put in a piece of route so this can make some sense. So you can see we put in our destination, or so departure airport. We'll put in a destination over here, so we'll right click on the airport, set it as our destination. It's worth pointing out, if you put in a different airport over here, so say we put in EGGW, you can right click here as well and you get the same menu. Yeah, as long as it's an airport, it doesn't matter if it's on the map or in a dialogue somewhere. Yeah, so you can come over here, right click on an airport, and it shows the same context relative menu. Okay, so we've got a little bit of flight plan there now, so we can go in here and we can type some remarks. So if we were going to save this and we wanted to write some notes, then we can go and write them in the remarks. Okay, fuel report. Remember we said that the performance data included how much fuel the aircraft burnt at each phase of its flight. Therefore you can get a really accurate fuel report. So it even estimates down to the taxi out to the runway. Yeah, so you've got taxi fuel there, contingency fuel, climb and descent. It's all very, very clever, and it also factors in the wind. So it's doing the wind en route and using NOAA data to do that, and again that can be configured. We'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, so this flight planning window then has several tabs. It has the remarks, the legs of the plan. Notice if you click on the legs, it puts a green arrow on the plan, and if you double click on a piece of the list, it will go to it on the map for you. Yeah, so then if we use the mouse wheel, you can zoom back out. Beyond that, we've got the fuel report, we've got the current performance, so it's on the ground. Once you started flying, you would start to see this fill up with data, and you would see, for example, the fuel burn rate and things like that, speed you're travelling at, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that was the flight planning window. If you pull up the information window, you could already see it there. It's worth pointing out all of these windows can be dragged, and they are what's called dockable. Yeah, so that means you can actually move them around the screen and drag them towards the edges, and they will try and intelligently snap into place. So if I pull this one down into this corner and let go, it will snap into that corner. If I wanted flight planning somewhere else, say down here underneath everything, I could if I wanted to. It really doesn't mind where you put things, but you tend to find most people put the flight plan up at the top left, information bottom left, map in the middle, and search on the right. So the information page gives you a static way of keeping something on the screen that instead of relying on hovering over it to see it. So if you right click on something, you can always do show information, and that could either be the airport or a specific ILS or something like that. So if we go and click on Luton Airport, you see there's the information, but notice we have more than just this overview. I mean, there's a lot on that overview. You've got the current weather, longest runway, so this is like summary information. You've also got elevation, which is really useful, but you've also got data on each runway. You've got all the comm frequencies, all of the procedures, all of the nearest airfields to Luton, and the nearest radio nav aids to Luton. And if we keep scrolling across, we've also got a summary of the weather. Yeah. So rather than trying to pick apart the NOAA METAR weather readout text, you can actually go and see like a sanitized version of it in here, where it's been made much easier to read. Okay, so also in the information page you have NavAid information. So if you were to go and click on a given NavAid, so say this Barkway one, it will pop over to the NavAid tab and show you all the breakdown of information about that particular NavAid. You can also do airspaces. Now, to make airspaces work, we're going to have to jump a little bit and show you something else. So there's some icons on the toolbar up here. These are airspaces, yeah? So we can say we want all of them shown, please, and the airspaces appear on the map. Notice you could pick and choose what you want to see. But then if you go and click on an airspace with the mouse, it shows you the name of the airspace and the details about it, like min and max altitude, and so on and so forth. So you could click on a different one. You can see there's the London TMA airspace. Okay, I'm going to turn the airspaces back off for the moment. We'll come back to that. You got a fuel report. So this is your fuel burn down during your flight. Oh, sorry, I've jumped across again, haven't I? Got user points. We haven't actually got any user points showing up. So I'm not going to get too much into user points. They're up here on the toolbar. They're the little star. I can say, show me all of them, please. And you can see suddenly it's all of, I've got a downloaded CSV. If we go and look in the user points, it's up here, I think, somewhere. User points. You can import them in various formats. If you go to flightsim.2, you'll find that you can download a CSV of all of the custom buildings and features in Flight Simulator in the stock scenery, which is exactly what I've downloaded. So I've got the CSV telling me where all of the points of interest are that have been built custom. Yeah, so if I go and click on one of those, it tells me about it and it tells me the exact location. So that's what the user points are. You can make your own. If you right click on the map somewhere, you can actually go to user points and you can add your own user points. So you could compile your own file of user points. And again, knowing that they are just CSV files, if you've got a database somewhere else that's got longitude, latitude and description, yeah, then you can go crazy for it and go make it. Okay, there's a logbook as well, so we're not going to get into that. You need to have flown flights for the logbook to be populated. Obviously it's going to show you details about the flight that you did. Okay, so that's the information screen. If we come further down, so we've looked at search, flight planning and information. We've got the flight plan elevation profile. We saw this earlier. It's very clever in that it breaks it down into the waypoints. So if we were to go and say add some more to this route, so we'll go over to here, set that as our destination, and we'll go via a VOR over here and add that to our flight plan. And we'll put another one in here and add that one to our flight plan. So we're putting a plan in flying via various VORs. Now look what's happened here. It's actually put them in the elevation plot over the ground, just to give you a really good reference. And as of the new beta as well, it's giving us the distance measurements between them as well. Although it also draws it on the line, it draws it in this elevation plot as well. But obviously the elevation plot really comes into its own if you are flying somewhere in the mountains. So just to illustrate that, if we go over to the Alps on the edge of Italy, so let's go and do a new flight plan just for example's sake. We'll set off from this airport here and we will visit Locarno, and then we'll visit or go and land then in Sondrio. So look at that. So this is really where the map itself comes into its own. Is working in tandem with the elevation profile. Notice we are using LittleNavMap at the moment. Sorry, OpenStreetMap, not LittleNavMap. We're using OpenStreetMap, which doesn't really give you elevation data. We can switch that over and use OpenTopoMap, and suddenly we can see the hills. And the more we zoom in, the more you see, like all the contour lines and everything. So remember, this is showing the elevation plot directly underneath the line. So what if we right click here and add a custom position to the flight plan? Notice it's chopping this down. So we'll change this as well. We'll say we're actually going to fly our route at 5,000 feet. So as soon as we've done that, this lifted in the air to 5,000 feet. So we might want to say, okay, we'll add another position there. And suddenly you can make sure that you're flying high enough. So yeah, maybe we go to 7,500 feet then. And suddenly we're not in trouble of going through these hills. I mean, obviously this wasn't a very high route anyway, but if we go and add positions to the flight plan, just to stay in the valleys, you can see very quickly you can minimize your risk of being too near the ground. And notice it's highlighting 1,000 feet over the ground at any high points of, you know, places we need to steer clear of. So obviously on the way in there, we have got some hills. Notice as we move the mouse along as well on the elevation plot, a circle moves on the map to give you reference as to where that is. So there's a hill just here, look, that we're not clearing. So all we need to do is put in some custom positions to go through that valley. There's a bit of a dog leg through the valley there at Sondrio. There you go, it's completely flattened it out. Look, we've avoided it. So obviously these big hills here are in our way, so we're flying over them. But we could go crazy and, you know, follow the water all the way around if we really wanted to. So just to, for argument's sake, let's do it. Position there, and we'll fly all the way out to here, add a position, and over here add a position. Now I was hoping that would happen. Remember we saw earlier that a point could go into the wrong place, so we've got waypoint number 4. So I've highlighted it on the list. I'm going to hold the control key down on the keyboard and use the up and down arrows to resequence it. So if I hold control on and press down, I am moving that leg further up or down the list, which is, you know, resequencing it amongst the other waypoints. So suddenly we can say add position, add position. It's a crazy flight plan, but you can see we've completely got rid of the hills from directly underneath of us by zigzagging around all over the place. We could do another one if we wanted to be mad about this. Add waypoint, add position, or we can add waypoints, look, if there are any nearby. Yeah, so you can see very quickly, so we could actually fly the whole route now at 5,000 feet if we fly all over the place. So we can recalculate that, look, and we stay just above the warnings. So you can see really quickly you can make some really quite complicated plans. So the huge advantage of all of this is the plan doesn't just live inside of LittleNavMap. You can go to the file menu and notice you can export the flight plan as a PLN file. So then you can load that into an aircraft in Flight Simulator, and all of those custom waypoints will be pre-programmed in. So you could hit, you know, or you'll, first of all, you will see that flight plan if you've got a glass cockpit in your aircraft. And secondly, if you've got nav mode and GPS mode enabled in the aircraft, the plane will follow all of those custom waypoints all on its own. Okay, so we were really talking about the elevation plot there, but you can see much more of a representative idea here of what it does. Yeah, so you get the height of the ground underneath your plot line on the map. So you saw very briefly there we were able to change the map, and we had lots and lots of options. I've got some custom ones installed, so there will be some here that you may not have. So for example, I can show the Google Maps terrain view, which is the usual one I use. It's a custom one. If you just Google it, Google Maps terrain LittleNavMap, you'll find the add-on for it. Okay, so what else shall we look at? Let's go into the window menu and carry on down. Simulate aircraft. Again, that was the dialogue we could already see over there, so we'll pop it back up. So that's telling us all about our aircraft, yeah? It's showing us where it is in the world and speed and so on. The progress tab is interesting. This comes alive if you're actually flying. Obviously it doesn't have much to say while we're sat here on the ground, but the progress tab would show us. That's a good point actually. If I hold control on and roll the mouse wheel, I can make the wording bigger or smaller. Yeah, this will obviously give you all of your data about the aircraft in flight, which is quite useful. Um, there's also AI multiplayer, so if you've got AI aircraft showing up, then they will show up. If I go and click the online thing over here and we pull up search, there's something that's worth looking at in search. If we scroll over to the right while we're in search, we can see the online clients. So that's a list of everybody that's appearing on the map. Okay, so we've gone through the major windows and some other side subjects as well. Notice there are many toolbars as well. They are all on by default, and you can see them all clustered up here with lines in between where each toolbar begins and ends. So you can see you can move those chunks of toolbar around. So you could customize it to the nth degree to have it exactly how you want, with windows in particular places and toolbars in particular places. And that's where the window menu also comes in, where you can save the layout. Yeah. If you muddle it up completely and you don't like what you've done, so say I've put this over here and I can't figure out how this works anymore, and oh, what have I done, and it's busted, and oh, this is completely unusable, you can go to the window menu and you can reset everything back to the way it was. So reset window layout to default, and it just fixes it for you. Okay, so you're never in a position where it's going to be completely broken. You can always reset back to default, and then once you've got it how you want it, you can save the layout as a file and reload it when you need it. A common one to do is to switch everything off and save one as minimal, where you've just got the map. Okay, so before we go much further, let's just have a quick look through these tools across the tool tab. So you've got new flight plan. So if I click that and it says, do I want to save what I've done? And I'll say no. So that's the new flight plan. You can open a flight plan from the disk. So if I open a flight plan, I've got one saved. If I double click on it, there's the flight plan. It's going to be a group flight I'm doing soon. So there you go. You can load flight plans. Obviously I can save that flight plan. I can do a save as, and I can export it actually as other formats. Yeah, so I can do flight sim, P3D, X-plane, flight gear, and there's various other export flight plan to other formats, and there's even more in there like vPilot, XIVAP, IVAP, GPX, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you can save your flight plan basically. If you look here, it says reset the flight plan, aircraft trail, and more for a new flight. The reason for that is while you're flying along, it leaves a dotted line behind your aeroplane, a bit like in an old movie scene. And that stays on the map until you get rid of it. And there's two ways of getting rid of it. You can either come in here, go to flight plan, and go to map, and remove all of the trails and everything. So you can see delete aircraft trail is there. There isn't one at the moment. That's why it's not lit up. So you can do all of that via the menus in the flight plan and the map menu. But that one button up there will go straight back to as if you're doing a new plan. So it tells you, what do you want to actually get rid of, and we'll just say everything. Yeah, get rid of everything. So we're back to a blank slate. Because while you're flying, you might be drawing those distance measurements and rings and all kinds of stuff. You might even draw holdings, which is something we'll get to. Okay, you can go to the home view. So if you click on that, it goes back out and zooms out. You can go to the center mark for distance search. So you can see I have set a center mark. You set a center mark by right clicking somewhere and go to more, and you can set the center. This is really useful if you're saying, okay, I want to do a flight, but I only want to fly about 400 or 500 miles based on how long I've got to do it. So you can go in the search, go to airports, and you can do a distance search. Notice there's a checkbox here. So I can fly from where the distance search center is. So remember, I right clicked that to do it, and I said more and set center. So from that center, I can say, find me anywhere within those bounds. If I remove that ICAO code, all it's found, look, is airports, and it's showing me the distance that I might fly to. So if I right click on that one, it's Rügen. So I'll set that as my destination. And if I set Heathrow as my departure, so I right click on Heathrow, set that as my departure, and then you can see a 528-mile route. So that's what that distance search does. Okay, so let's carry on across the dialog up here. So center the flight plan. Now we have a flight plan that actually works. Keep the user aircraft centered. So while this is highlighted, notice it lights up and stays lit up. That will keep our aircraft in the simulator in the middle of the screen, basically. We do get to drag away from it, but after 10 seconds it will snap back to it. Okay, so if we can clear all the highlights on the map. So if we've gone and highlighted anything, that will get rid of it for us. Just working my way across here. Go back to the last map position, go forwards to the next. So if you've been zooming around looking at different places, this does actually remember where you've been looking, which is really useful as well. You can select the detail map to draw on the map. So detail level to draw on the map. So you can slide this up and make it less or more cluttered. So there's normal, and again you can use the mouse wheel as well on that. Okay, you saw in the world you can choose the tiling basically for the map in the background. So if we go back to OpenStreetMap, you'll see the default one that comes out of the box. Okay, so after that you get the option to choose the airports and various navigation features available. So let's go and turn everything off and turn them back on one by one. So we'll say none of those, none of that, none of that, none of that, no aeroplanes. So nothing is lit up now. So these are the major airports. Yeah. And again, it's according to what's in here. So we could say we want just the hard surface ones or not. You can toggle them basically. You could say a runway length limit. I only want runways that are over 4,000 feet, for example. Or you could say get rid of that limit entirely. So you can tune how many airports are appearing on the map for you. And that's tied to zoom distance as well. So the further we go out, the smaller airfields disappear. Okay, so you can turn on the radio navigation aids. So the VOR beacons and vortex, things like that will all appear all over the map. NDBs, fixes or waypoints. Notice as you zoom in they get names. Obviously you can then click on them and it shows you the information on it anyway. Feathers for ILS. So again, as you zoom in on an ILS it tells you all the information about it, but if you click on it anyway it tells you it again in the dialog there, and if you hover over it the pop-up shows you all the information. I think this is the GLS approach paths, so yeah, they're not as common. So ILS is going to be the one you use the most. So if there are any holdings, if we go back to London, we'll see the holdings. So any established holdings that are common will be drawn onto the map for you, so you've got a good reference of where they are. While we're looking at that, we'll also look at something else. So I'll get rid of the holdings so it's not too busy on the map. And we'll go and look at Wickham, because it's a small airfield and it's easy to do this with. If we right click on Wickham, we can add the traffic pattern to Wickham. And we can specify what we want the traffic pattern to look like. So we might want the runway 24 traffic pattern doing left turns with 1 mile base leg, 1 mile downwind at say 2,000 feet, for example. Or you can choose the line color as well, and you can have the entry and exit indicators, and we go OK, and it draws you the traffic pattern. Okay. If you want to remove that traffic pattern off the map, you just right click on the small circle at the start of the traffic pattern, and then you can remove the traffic pattern. You can do holdings yourself in exactly the same way. So if you want to draw a holding, you can add a holding, and again it will ask you for the parameters of the hold. If we just say OK, it will draw it with whatever the parameters were that were on the screen there. So it's obviously saying 225 degrees, 45 degrees, and a 1 minute hold. So if we right click, and we can remove the holding. Okay, so that holding took us to go and look at circuits, so that's all good. You get the MSA sectors, which you can show. I don't think that will really apply here. No, it kind of does. So if you go and zoom in down here, you can see them. Yep. You get Victor airways. This is the low altitude airways. Yeah, so you can see them. So when you're planning a flight in the big jets, that comes in really useful, obviously. You can change all the size of the text and everything behind the scenes. I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. You get the jet airways, the high altitude airways. So you can see the map becomes a giant mess when you're looking at them. So while we're looking at jet airways, you can see there's another one here. There's the tracks. If we zoom out, they're not drawn on by default. And the reason for that is they change all the time. So if we go to flight plan, we can download the oceanic tracks. Give it a second, and there they are. So it gets the current tracks being flown across the ocean based on the weather, basically, because that's why they change so often, because of the weather. So planes flying across the ocean will be following these tracks, and that means that that button now becomes active and we can turn the tracks on and off. And again, being able to download the tracks is new in this version of LittleNavMap. So we will delete the oceanic tracks so they're not actually there now. Okay, so next up we've got user features. So we can switch on and off whether any of this stuff appears, like range rings, measurement lines, traffic patterns. By default, they're all on. If we say none, they'll all disappear, and we won't get the option to draw them either. So if you go and right click and you think, well, I can't draw a measurement line, why? It's because you've said none in here. Yeah. So user points we saw. You can create user points. Obviously there's lots of types of user point you could choose, so you can switch on particular types of user point or just say all. Now in my database I've just got the points of interest, like for example this building here, Cologne Cathedral, for example. We'll turn that back to none for the moment. The yellow line is the flight plan that we've made. Missed approaches, do we want to show them or not? It's on by default. Notice these ones stay on or off. So if we were flying towards Rügen, that doesn't have a missed approach. But we'll come back to missed approaches. We'll leave it on because I'll do an IFR flight plan in a minute to show you how SIDS and stars work. If you want to show your aeroplane, that's the yellow icon, and you will notice now there is a yellow aeroplane sat down there at Wickham. If you want to show a dotted line behind you as you're flying, that's the next icon, and that will leave a little dotted trail as I fly along through the sky. You can show a compass. Notice as well that, it's not in this dialogue, you can actually detach that compass from the aircraft. And I can't remember where that is for the life of me, but I'm going to move on for the moment because it's something you'd very rarely do. You can show AI aircraft, and that's the orange aircraft. So that's a plane being drawn by the simulator. Yeah, there's another one there. Notice they are separate from the online aircraft now. So that's something that's changed in the beta. That used to be one option in the older versions of LittleNavMap, so you can now separate that out and have the online and AI as two separate things. You can show boats or not, or other vehicles I should say. So yeah, multiplayer ship position and data on the map. So obviously if we do that, I haven't actually got any at the moment, so that's fine. So you can show a map grid, so you can have the longitude latitude grid on your map. Country and city names. Again, that only applies to certain maps. It doesn't to this one, therefore it's not there. The minimum altitudes. around the world. Yep. So it's giving you your minimum safe cruise altitudes. And I think if we hover over that, yeah, show minimum off-route altitude, MORA. Show the airport, show the airport weather icons. So if we go and zoom in, is it going to give us anything much to talk of? Not really. The one that's really of interest to us is this one. We can find the wind at the ground, for example. If we zoom in, there we go. So that's the wind, direction and speed. So we can choose cruise altitude. We can also choose wind for a selected altitude. So if we wanted to know what the wind is that's at, say, 30,000 feet, there you go. So if you are doing a long route, like a transatlantic route or something, that becomes very useful to you, and you might end up rerouting based on that data. And that you can choose where that data comes from. I'll show you where to do that in a moment. So I'm going to say no, we don't want to see any wind at the moment. That's fine. And you can have sun shading on the globe. So there you go. It's drawing the sun onto the representation of the Earth. Okay. If you look back in here, you can have spherical or Mercator projection. So if you want to draw the Earth as a globe, you can. It's a lot slower. If you want to draw it normally, you can. And again, turning the light projection off speeds up the drawing as well. Okay. So before we go and deep dive into the menus, looking at the bits and pieces there, let's go and do a plan that we might do for a jet plane. So we're going to go and do a new flight plan. We're not going to bother saving anything. We're going to go to aircraft performance and open the aircraft performance of a 737, for example. It's going to complain because I'm actually in a Cessna, but that's not going to stop us from actually putting a flight plan in. So let's pretend we're going to fly from Heathrow. So we'll right click, set Heathrow as our departure, and then we'll zoom out and we'll go and fly to, let's fly somewhere interesting. Maybe just get rid of that dialogue. Maybe Nice, and set Nice as the destination. Okay, so you can see there's our altitude plot, and we could say, okay, this is an IFR flight, and we're going to fly it at, say, 30,000 feet. So based on the 737 performance, it's worked out our climb and descent. So this is where LittleNavMap really gets interesting and really kind of starts to meet the likes of Navigraph. If you right click on the airport, we can say, show us the departure procedures for Heathrow. So we can say these are the SIDs, the standard instrument departures. So based on the wind, we could say, okay, we're going to be leaving on runway 27 right, for example. And when we zoom out, we can see the standard instrument departure we've just highlighted on the list superimposed onto the map. And we can go and flick through the different SIDs and say we want that one, for example, the Det 2F departure. We can right click on it and we can insert it into our flight plan. So if you've never seen SIDs and stars before, a SID is basically a sequence of waypoints, potentially with restricted speeds and altitudes at each of the waypoints as well. So if we insert that SID, it puts it into our flight plan and then carries on along its way. Where it becomes interesting is if we look in here. So we go and click on that cog menu again, and we go and remove the data we did have. Let's ask for the procedure, the airway and the restriction, and say OK. So it's doing that. You can see, look, it at that waypoint, and when we click on it, remember, we get the little green circle appears. At that waypoint, we need to be above 590 feet indicated. Above sea level, sorry. At the Epsom waypoint, we need to be above 4,000 feet by the time we get there. We need to be at 6,000 feet until we get to Detling. Yeah? And then you can begin your cruise. So these are the real world standard instrument departures. There's something I should get into before we go much further with talking about that, is when we were looking at the scenery library menu earlier, you saw that there was an option. If you've got multiple simulators installed, you can see I no longer have X-Plane installed, but I've got Flight Sim selected here, and notice it also says Navigraph. If you've got Navigraph, LittleNavMap can use its data, so you can choose. You don't have to. You can say use Navigraph for nav aids and procedures. Yeah, and it will integrate it directly in and use its database as well as the flight sim data. Okay, so we put a standard instrument departure in. So what about if we want to go to Nice then? How are we going to arrive at Nice? So if we right click, we can say show the arrival procedures for Nice. And notice they are split into the stars, the standard approach routes, and the approaches. So that's basically like the ILS. So if we go and hover over Nice, we can see the weather, and there's the NOAA station METAR report there. The wind is 320 degrees, 7 knots, so it's coming in from this way. So we probably need to land runway 22. So if we were going to say, okay, let's look at the ILS. Is there an ILS? No, there isn't. There's only feathers for runway 4 look. So it would have to be an RNAV into runway 22. And we can look at the various options and see where's a good one. There's a good one. So we'll right click that and we'll insert that RNAV approach in. Yeah. Notice it has also drawn, and this is why I said I was going to come back to this. There's the missed approach procedures. It's also drawn the missed approach procedure because that's part of this approach. Yeah, is if you're not going to make it, you turn off and you go into a holding pattern up here, and it's all got all the instructions to do it. So beyond that approach, what is the standard approach route to get to that approach? So let's go and have a look at them. And again, we can zoom out and we can have a look at them on the map and see which ones make sense. So we're trying to get to Nanax, remember. So we could come in here. So that probably does make sense, doesn't it, that one? We could come in there, fly around, and if we did miss it, we basically come back to this point. So you'll see what I mean in a moment. If we right click and insert that for 22, was it 22 left we were aiming for? We can see it over here, can't we? Yes, 22 left. And say OK. Notice, yeah, it joins it up, look. At the end of the star, there's the yellow line that carries on across to the beginning of the approach. Obviously, if you miss it, you come back out here, enter a holding pattern, and then get back onto the approach again. Okay, so that's kind of done. The standard instrument departure and the star for an instrument route. But what about all this part in the middle? You can either do it by hand. So you could pull up the Jet Airways, for example, and you could say, oh, actually I'd like to, get on this one at Sandy and fly along and you could figure it all out yourself, which is a great academic exercise, but you don't actually have to. What you can do, there's an icon up here on the toolbar, shows you the flight plan calculation window. So if we pop that open, we'll say calculate from departure to destination. Using the Jet Airways, cruising altitude for the calculation, we're going to fly at 30,000 feet, and we are going to, yeah, that's fine. We can just leave everything as it is and we can calculate. And it's done all of the routings for us via the Jet Airways. So if we go and superimpose that back over now, you can see, look, it's got onto these various corridors through the sky and followed them at the appropriate altitudes for us right the way across the sky, and it's done it far more quickly than we could have done it. Obviously in the real world you would have this given to you, but this is the tool that you can make a flight plan with. Yeah, so this is the same thing SimBrief would do behind the scenes, is go and work all this out for you. So LittleNavMap can do exactly the same trick. Notice in the file menu, you can open a flight plan from SimBrief now, and you can export it to SimBrief. That's new in the beta of LittleNavMap. Yeah, that wasn't there before. You can also show the flight plan in SkyVector, so it's very cool. Okay, so we've got obviously a lot going on here now, but the interesting thing for us to look at for an instrument flight route is these airways are now filled in automatically. So along this like 850 here, you've actually got 3 or 4 waypoints along that route. So if we go and shift click them, you'll see them all circled here. Obviously we can declutter this by turning off the airways and having a look. We could turn off the other aeroplanes so we can concentrate on what we're doing. And you can see all of that being drawn on this elevation plot. Notice this shows you also those restrictions. So if we make this bigger and we go and scroll across, you can see those altitude restrictions. And if we scroll down to the other end, you'll see the approach into, and again we can use the mouse to zoom. You can see the approach in. Yeah, so while you're doing your descent, you can be watching the predicted line and where you are, and know if you need to correct at all, or if you're coming down it in a timely manner. Obviously in the big jets you can use the green banana, as they call it, and things like that in the EFIS display. But okay, let's zoom back out. So I'm just using the mouse wheel to do that. You can also zoom vertically, so you can scroll this, which is useful. So you might have zoomed that way, and you might want some more vertical separation here to make sense of it. So you can do that, and then scroll this back down. I've just made it steeper for myself. Yeah, just so you can see it more easily. Okay, so let's come back. The last thing I really want to look at is the tools menu. LittleNavMap is fantastically flexible. So if we go and look in options, there are many sections to this. So if we go and look in startup and updates, it's all the basics around should I look for new versions and that kind of thing. User interface, you can choose the language. Display and text, you can choose the size of text throughout the various parts of the interface. Units, you can choose the units that are used everywhere. The map itself, you can choose what gets tooltips, so you can really fine control how detailed things are. Map navigation, you can configure how the mouse works with it. I would recommend you don't, because you probably want to learn the way it works rather than try and twist it. Map display, you can completely control the size and thickness and colours of things, like the colouring of the flight plan and the line thicknesses, that kind of stuff. The users as well, you can go and completely control it again. The labels that appear on the map you can control. So on the flight plan you can switch on and off the various labels. So on an AI multiplayer or online, you can switch on and on, like the indicated airspeed, for example. Map display keys. Okay, so this gets into, you remember we saw we could choose different maps from different providers. Some of them are commercial, so you can put an API key in. So say you've got a commercial agreement with Mapbox, for example, you could get their API key and drop it in, and then suddenly you can use their maps in LittleNavMap. Map display online. Yeah, I'm not going to get too much into that. That's to do with showing where the controllers are in VATSIM. I haven't shown you that yet. Simulator aircraft. So that's details about the aircraft being drawn from the simulator. The flight plan, a few options around that. Weather, where it's getting the data from, NOAA or VATSIM or IVAO, or the simulator itself. Weather files. So you could have actually, data files that have got the weather in them. Online flying. Notice I've got this set to custom. I use a service called virtualflight.online that I made actually. That anybody running a small program called Transmitter can transmit their position. Those were all those little red airplanes you saw on the map. If you actually want to see that, go and visit Virtual Flight Online on the web and click on Transmitter. It's a tiny little program you can run. I can show you it here. If I go and run it, this is Transmitter. If I connect it to the simulator, it's connected. And if I pull this down, it's reporting my longitude, latitude, altitude, heading, airspeed, ground speed, and last landing rate. Oh, and aircraft type. And then I go onto the map. So I could go and look in the clients list in search and see myself now. And that's all it does. So that allows that to happen. Where this maybe becomes more interesting is if you are flying with VATSIM, you can show it on the map. So I can have VATSIM shown directly on the map, along with others like IVAO and Pilot Edge. So we'll quickly go and do that. So we'll zoom out and we'll switch on the online. There's a lot of planes, isn't there? This is why I don't typically have this on. So these are all the people around the world flying on VATSIM. And when you go and click on one, you get a lot of information because you get all their flight plan and everything as well that they filed. But beyond just the aircraft, you get a lot more with VATSIM. You also get the sectors. So we're going to turn off our sectors and we'll go for the OTR ones. These are the VATSIM sectors, like controllers that are online right now and sectors that are being manned. So if we go and click on a sector, it tells us about that sector. Actually, it doesn't show us if it is manned, does it? That's a shame. Yeah, interesting. If we go and click on one of these, so it gives you all of the information, but unfortunately not whether it's being manned or not. So you'd have to use something like one of the many VATSIM websites that can show you that, or one of the client applications. Okay, so go back to the tools menu. We'll put that back to custom. Oh, I want just custom, don't I? Which uses the URL. If I go to web server, this is quite a nice trick. LittleNavMap can actually act as a web server, so then you can use the URL elsewhere. That would include certain add-ons from FlightSim.2 that let you have LittleNavMap appearing inside the aircraft. Yeah, so as a tablet or a pop-up window, which you could then obviously see in VR and things like that. So if you go web server and if you switch it on, start the web server, you get a URL you can use. So if I go and open that up, we'll see that in the browser, and that's actually going over the web. That's actually being broadcast in a browser now. So obviously it's not quite as rich functionality. All you can really do is move around, but you're seeing the same stuff being broadcast that's rendered in the sim, basically. Okay, so if we come back, we'll stop that web server. Scenery library database, yeah, there's not really much to do in there. But hopefully that gives you some idea, though, of just how rich an application LittleNavMap is. It's pretty stunning, really. We're going to turn off some of this stuff that I don't use. I'm just trying to think if I've actually missed anything along the way. It keeps a logbook. You've got the aircraft performance, you've got the scenery library management, so you can have multiple simulators and flick it between using each one's scenery database. You can connect to multiple simulators. There's a plugin for it for X-Plane, which allows LittleNavMap to see where you are in X-Plane as well. The interface is infinitely configurable. It's just a very, very powerful, very flexible program. But it doesn't have to be super complicated. So if we just very quickly before we stop, let's go and do a final example of building a flight out. So we'll reset this to default, so it's as it would have been when we first started it. We'll say new flight plan. So when you first load into this and you see yourself on the ground, you might say, okay, I want to fly from here to here. Yeah, and I want to fly via this VOR, and I want to fly via this VOR. Oops, right click, add VOR, And then you could go and program that into your plane, or you could save this as a PLN file and load it in the menu of Flight Sim. But you could program that into your plane, or just fly visually and use this as a reference, which is just as valid. And that gives you obviously effectively a moving visual map, which you can use while you're en route to look up navigation codes or distances and measurements, because remember, you can right click and you can measure distances. Yeah. And again, they stay on the map, so you could just use that itself. You don't have to do a flight plan. And then you could see, obviously you can see yourself, so you could be flying along that route, seeing where you can get to. By the same token, if you are an air traffic controller with a group flight, you can use LittleNavMap as your air traffic control station. To help you do that, some of the maps are actually dark. So if you go and look in the where was it? I'm not going to remember where this was now. It's in the world icon, isn't it? I think there's a dark version. Map box satellite. No, we don't want that. Carto dark. There we go. Obviously, you can go and change all of those colorings that we saw in the options. So you could make a dark version of LittleNavMap that looks more like a radar display. That's totally up to you. I'm just going to go for OpenStreetMap because it's nice and quick. Okay, so there you go. LittleNavMap for all of the simulators, basically. Anything that supports the SimConnect interface will work with LittleNavMap. And I'm going to leave it there. I think we've covered quite enough. Okay, I'll see you again soon.